sky afar, faintly gleamed the evening star. Over lake and hill to go, the western breezes blow. In the shadows lengthening, while our love is strengthening, from the heart comes still to us an evening song, an evening song, an evening song of Coe. Many hearts beat high for her, all her sons would die for her. Far and near they yearn for us to make her colors grow. Memories haunt her campus knoll, thoughts that steal from soul to soul. From the heart comes turns to us and swell the fame, and swell the fame, and swell the fame of Coe. Wandering breeze afar it flies, sinks the sun to other skies. Night comes all too soon for us, but one song then we go. Where yon twittering swallows swing, lilies taint the zephyr's wing. Life is all attuned to us who bide our while, who bide our while, who bide our while at Coe.
To all gathered here in this place, especially to Carol and Gregory, Scott, Karen, Stephen, Stuart, family and friends, co-workers, and all who loved Kent, our doc. Please know that we at Coe College are pouring our love and our prayers into you and around you on this day and all the days to come. Into this day of sorrow and celebration, let us pray. God of grace and glory, we remember before you today our brother Kent. We thank you for giving him to us to know and to love as a companion in our pilgrimage on earth. In your boundless compassion, console us who mourn. Give us faith to see that death has been swallowed up in the victory of the one who conquered death, so that we may live in confidence and hope until by your call, we are gathered into our heavenly home in the company of all your saints through Christ who loves us all and calls us each by name. Into your hands, O merciful God, we commend your servant Kent. Remember him in your love, O God, our brother and uncle, our co-worker and colleague, our friend and family member, our teacher and mentor, our sojourner in this journey of life and learning. Receive Kent into the gracious arms of your mercy, into the blessed rest of everlasting peace, and into the glorious company of all the saints in light. And together we pray, amen.
Good afternoon, and welcome to Coe College. Whether you're here with us in person or participating online, my name is David Hayes. I am myself a 1993 alumnus of this institution, and I have the honor of serving it as its 16th president. Today we will take full measure of a life very well lived. Our time together is rightfully filled with tears, laughter, gratitude, and yes, a healthy dose of fun. That is all appropriate as we celebrate the life and profound impact of Dr. W. Kent Herron. We are nearly 400 strong in this storied auditorium, with hundreds more online. And as such, with joy and appreciation in our hearts, let us remember our friend and colleague, Doc Herron, educator, mentor, and hero to so many of us here at Coe. Kent served as a faculty member of Coe for more than 50 years. The respect and love shared among 2.5 generations of Coe's professors for Doc is profound, and the friendships he forged can only be described as treasured and special. Dr. Wendy Dunn, the James Canfield Professor Emerita of Psychology, and herself an exemplar of scholar and educator of the highest distinction, and a dear, dear friend to Kent, is here today to represent the faculty to offer some of her reflections. Dr. Dunn.
Good afternoon. The noted theorist Gordon Allport believed that human uniqueness is best described as a constellation of traits or characteristics, things such as open-mindedness, extroversion, energy level, and so forth. Allport also argued that there are a few rare individuals who possess what he called a cardinal trait, a singular quality so pervasive and dominant that it, above all other things, defines that person. I think Kent Herron was one of those rare people, and his cardinal trait was generosity. Now, those of you who knew Kent knew that he loved a good bargain, especially when it came to hotel rooms and restaurant meals. When he traveled, he would make sure his friends back home knew he had managed to find a handy and relatively clean hotel room, usually, but not always, with a bathroom in the room, and usually for some outrageous price, like $39 or $49. And he often sent us photos of an especially large and truly tasty meal from the road, like 2 eggs, bacon, sausage, breakfast potatoes, a pancake, and maybe a biscuit for something like $3.99. He was so proud of those things, and they made him happy. But Kent was unbelievably generous when it came to sharing experiences with others. On his most recent trip to Europe, I had suggested he eat at a somewhat pricey Michelin-style restaurant in Budapest, and I sent him photos of the beautiful food there. He, of course, took his student companions there for dinner and sent me the next day the following email, and I quote, "All 3 of my ducklings had never eaten in a restaurant like that, so the experience was worth every penny. The soups and appetizers were excellent and the desserts fabulous. The main dishes were a bit spotty and a little more skimpy than necessary, even for old people. But we had 3 desserts and each one was nearly unbelievable, and then we got a 4th dessert as an extra, and it was unbelievable." I think he especially loved that free dessert. And he took special delight in his final plan for that trip. He had led these boys to believe that they would be spending their last 2 nights tent camping by the side of the road. And it was cool and raining, and cold rain was in the forecast for the remainder of the trip. But in fact, weeks before, he had, at his expense, booked them all into rooms at the world-famous Waldhaus 5-star spa resort hotel, a truly majestic place in Switzerland that Kent had visited with various groups of friends over the years. Kent was so delighted about this surprise. I think it was the highlight of the trip for him on what turned out to be his last adventure in international travel. Those of you here today who have had the great privilege of traveling with Kent, whether to England, Europe, Australia, India, Italy, or his beloved Aspen, will know this generosity, including his thoughtful and careful planning done in such a way as to ensure everyone the best of times. He was remarkable. And Kent was generous in a much more important way. He always chose to see the best in people. This generosity of judgment could be mistaken, perhaps, as a lack of critical thought, a Pollyanna-like view of life, but it was not. Kent's intellect was very keen, and he saw people clearly. He was aware of our limitations, and he could see our faults for what they are. But he somehow was able to overlook these, focusing instead on our positive qualities and forgiving us for our negativity and harshness. Kent was an optimist about human nature, and his family members, colleagues, students, and friends were much the better for his generous heart. Kent loved life, he loved people, and he loved teaching. As you may know, he had planned to retire at the end of this academic year, knowing that his salary would be used to support other Coe causes. But you may not know that he was planning to teach a course or two next fall for free. He loved his students and his colleagues, especially those in and near the math department, and all of whom supported him and made his final years so rich and good. Kent was generous with the most precious of things: his concern for the well-being of others, his energy, and his time. He leaves a grand legacy as well as a hole in our hearts. We are better people for having known this honest, kind, and generous man. Kent, you are and will be missed.
It is, of course, impossible to tell Doc's story without noting his leadership and bond with generations of Tau Kappa Epsilon fraternity members. He served as faculty advisor of Coe's Zeta chapter for decades and was instrumental in the lives of all who were members during this time. On behalf of the fraternity, in recognition of his tireless devotion to the young adults who became men during and under his guidance, I invite Graham Peterson, class of 2025 and past TEAC president of the chapter, to the podium to share a poem from an author around whom Kent and I enjoyed many conversations.
Moving higher, my thumping chest recites the names of a dozen friends who have died in recent years, names now incomprehensible as the mountains across the river far behind me. I'll always be walking up toward Antelope Butte. Perhaps when we die, our names are taken from us by a divine magnet and are free to flutter here and there within the bodies of birds. I'll be a simple crow who can reach the top of Antelope Butte.
Doc was quite proud of his Dubuque origin story, and he filled his days with love and time spent with his family, many of whom have joined us here today, for which we are grateful. He was particularly close to his beloved sister, Virginia, and I would be remiss not to pause to also honor and remember her today, as she passed within days of Kent's own death. I take comfort in knowing that they were again quickly together, as inseparable in death as they were in life. Doc has a niece with us today, who he often referred to as my favorite niece. He has other nieces, and I imagine he referred to all his nieces and nephews in the same way. In fact, I've heard it said before. Carol Dennison will offer some thoughts on Doc's two families, his own and that he found here at Coe.
I'm a novice at this, but thank you, David. My brothers, Stephen, Stuart, Scott, and I, and our families are honored to be here as part of this celebration of life for Kent. It's a beautiful tribute, and you'll hear lots of stories. I hope maybe I bring two new ones to you that you don't know. The first one is, we had a farm, and there was a lot of cousins, But there was an old bachelor uncle called Uncle Doc. And Uncle Doc got that name because it's described to me by various older cousins that he was an animal whisperer. He had a unique talent to care for them. They loved him, they came to him, and that's how he got his name, Doc. Well, the family amusement is that Uncle Kent had to work very hard to be able to be called Doc. And that was something that made people smile, how easy old Uncle Doc got his name, and young Uncle Doc had to work for years to be deserving of the same kind of name. When we were cleaning out his office, we found, this is ridiculous, I think this went in Mother's genealogy book, but it's a tribute to Uncle Doc because they all loved him. And it's a picture of old Uncle Doc and the future Uncle Doc. And so that did validate the love that he had for Uncle Doc. And his words in that tribute was, Doc was greatly loved and deeply missed. And I would say we'll say the same for this Uncle Doc. On a visit to our home in Texas, he discussed some of the things of when he was trying to decide on what he wanted to do with his life. And I assumed teaching, but he also mentioned ministry, which was surprising to me. And again, when we were cleaning out his office, my husband, Greg, found his applications for the Danforth Fellowship, and in that application was the things that he wondered what he would do with his life, and there was ministry. The other thing in there, and some of our findings, was that he wanted to get all of his education done so that he got as far as he wanted to go with it, and then he could devote himself to teaching. And the thing that I think about that is that I believe that he fulfilled his desire of ministry also. I looked up what ministry was, and a biblical definition of ministry is serving others with love, compassion, and a selfless heart. And I do believe that's how Kent led his life. Lastly, impact was a big word that was in discussion when this event was being planned, and we do all feel the impact of Kent. He impacted many lives in many ways and set an example of a life well lived. Lastly, I'd like to say thank you for sharing this moment with us. And to Coe College, thank you for giving us this wonderful moment.
Sandy and Tom Kalapek are co-alumni. In addition to being two of Kent's closest friends, they benefited and at times suffered from being Doc's longtime neighbor. Doc had a unique avuncular ability to connect across generations. And Tom and Sandy's daughter, Bailey Kalapek, who Doc adored as his own, will offer her own thoughts and memories of growing up with Dr. Kent Herron as your neighbor.
Hello. I'm honored to be here today to celebrate such a special person to us all. As he said, I'm here to share a unique perspective that I was able to have of Kent. My story actually begins, as I'm sure many of yours does, a teak at Coe College. As you can quickly see, I'm not that teak, but rather my dad, Tom Kalapek. He was on one of Kent's original summer paint crews and also lived a few summers with him. My dad and Kent ended up forming a very special bond. And as he and my mom, Sandy, embarked into the real world, Kent wanted them to live close to him in North Liberty, rather than setting their roots in Cedar Rapids, where they both worked. This led to Kent kicking out his renters of his second home across the street for my parents to move in. And once they could afford it, he even let them purchase the home from them. As I'm sure you're all aware, Kent, being the master negotiator that he is, was somehow able to keep many rights of this home, even though my parents had the ownership. Such as the carport, which meant he had teaks demolish one slow day and convert into a deck for use of any social occasion he desired. The rights to direct which trees he would like planted and where in their yard, and he even managed to keep most of the garage space for his BMW motorcycles. I often wonder how different my life would have been had Kent not given those two college kids, who really didn't have much to offer Kent other than their friendship, the opportunity to own such a beautiful home to raise their young family in. And this is really where my page of the book starts, at 3886 Locust Ridge Road, the last house on a dead end and right across the street from Kent Herron, who fortunately, for my brother Bo and I, would become our adopted grandpa and enrich our lives in many ways. He was a staple in our days, and since many of you crossed his path in your adult years, through class, networking, or a glass of bourbon, maybe even on that same deck that we used to grill Sunday night dinner with on, I'd like to share a few moments of Kent through a child's eyes. He was my best and my only lemonade stand customer, year after year. You see, I could have moved up shop up the road by the mailboxes where the traffic actually flowed, instead of the dead end that Kent and I sat on. But I knew if I did that, then Kent wouldn't feel sorry enough for me to stop by not once, but again, hours later, with a $20 bill each time. He was quite the profitable customer for me, and we all know how generous that is for Kent. When my brother lost his pet bunny, Kent found my brother searching for him on his acreage. Kent joined my brother's search party for hours, despite knowing that my dad had just let the bunny out into the wild. If that doesn't describe the soft spot that Kent had for us children, I don't know what will. Every evening before dinner, I'd trek over to Kent's for cheese and crackers together. He would halt whatever he was doing to cut up our favorite cheeses and also made me try a new one every single week. Until my parents hollered for me to come back home, he would let me tell him all about my day at school. This was a long-standing tradition, and it's how I remember him the most. I can still picture coming down the road and looking for his taupe sob. You see, I knew if I saw it in the drive, my parents couldn't tell me he wasn't home, and I'd be due for our special cheese and crackers date. As you can imagine, we skipped right over my parents for any math homework help and spent a lot of time on his kitchen table with our textbooks open. His garden hose was also ours, where we spent many summer afternoons drinking out of it. I can't tell you how many times he had such patience and understanding when the wild neighbor kids across the street left the hose running and it flooded his yard, or when we had to quickly recruit him to come and help us change the attachment so we could hose the mud off our feet before our parents returned home and found out we had been down skipping rocks at the lake unattended. He never once ratted us out for breaking the rules. When we got old enough to stay home alone, I used to wait for my parents to drive away, and then I'd run across the street to Kent. I was too scared to be home alone, and my brother never shared the TV remote with me. Kent, with no hesitation, would hand over his remote to the only TV in the home, and no matter what he had on, he let me have it. For many years, he ended up logging endless hours of Lizzie McGuire while grading papers. Even in my college years, my parents would never leave the house without saying, "Kent is home, just down the street in case you get scared, Bailey." My brother and I both very appropriately shared our first taste of bourbon with Kent. Mine came at 21 years old at the Elks Club during an Easter brunch, while my brother's came much earlier, at age 3, during Kent's first babysitting gig. Kent had poured himself a glass on a Friday afternoon, as his job was simply to keep my brother out of the construction zone while my dad finished the basement. He popped out for a minute and returned to my brother doing the universal choking sign, as he thought Kent had just gotten him a glass of apple juice. It was a favorite of stories of Kent's to tell, and I can still hear his thunderous laugh reliving that one, despite my dad immediately firing him from babysitting and requesting him to never tell my mom about this. Kent also brought me my first boyfriends when I was 5 and when I was 3. Teeks, of course. Lance and Tunny lived at Kent's and were also forced into hearing about my day over cheese and crackers regularly. However, my dad made sure I knew all about Teeks, so neither one of them lasted long. We also took many rides on his antique John Deere that he loved. Once we got older, my parents wanted to fulfill their dream of building a home, but none of us could imagine leaving our special neighbor who had kept watch on us all of these years. So again, Kent graciously offered his little acreage so that we could stay. We later moved up the street to 3862 Locust Ridge and built their dream home on his hobby farm so we could stay close to our beloved Kent. As I grew, it became very apparent that not everyone had this special neighbor in their life. Not every street comes with your own adopted superhero that is the highlight in your everyday life. So, when I heard of the unfortunate news, I had a really hard time explaining to those who didn't know little Bailey what a loss this was for my family and I. You see, he was not just my next-door neighbor. He was so much more than that. I imagine all of you had this same predicament when you tried to explain this loss to you. Because no matter what Kent was to you, I am sure he was never just a professor, never just a coworker, or never just a friend. He somehow was so above and beyond in every responsibility he carried. His impact was exceptional and often indescribable. But I know that if you're here with us today, then you know exactly what I mean when I say he was just Doc to the Calipex. That's the only way I know how to describe him. There are several things that I loved about Kent, but what I loved the most was his ability to uplift others. There was no one who wanted you to succeed more than Kent, and I watched him mentor my parents for years. Kent is the kind of person who left everybody he crossed paths with better than how he found them. He was a helping hand, a great neighbor, a listening ear, or simply the company you might need, sitting there with a bourbon in hand. So, starting today, I'd like to challenge us all to lead with kindness, to love your neighbor, and to leave others better than how you found them. To me, that's Kent's best legacy, after all. Thank you.
Doc's impact and influence across generations, represented by Bailey, is further reflected within the Coe family as well. And I'll invite Jace Jensen, class of 2006, and a great friend of Doc's, to offer his thoughts. Jace served as the unofficial archivist for Kent's many references to random Seinfeld observations made on most, if not all, days. These would usually include us mere mortals who couldn't quite get the joke or how it connected to what we just witnessed. Even when he explained, Hayes, it's just like when Kramer told Elaine, and he always followed that with, I've got to tell Jace about this.
Thank you. I'm going to keep these remarks brief here. One thing I want to be thankful for is just that Doc connected us all. And I want to thank Coe as well for being that partner for Doc. And I want to thank Coe. As an alumni, it's special to experience the connections that Doc had with so many that brought us all together today. If you just look around, you know, you're really a part of his not just his Dubuque family, but his Coe family. And Coe to some becomes a family. And it was another family for Doc. It was a home. Thank you, President Pfeiffer. Thank you, President Hayes. Anyone that's involved with Coe. It's a special place, and I just wanted to, struggling here a little bit. I actually wrote down some Seinfeld lines in case this happened. and to say, buddy, you champion. And things like, hello, my friend, it's good to hear your voice. And as he parted to say, okay, my friend, thanks for the call. Talk soon. Bye. I just miss hearing things like that. He was such a good friend. He cared for so many, and the quality of those relationships were just so strong. I've just been hard-pressed to figure out how you move on from losing someone like Doc. And my thoughts were really just to keep in mind to connect and support each other. And not just each other, but an entire generation of new friends that we'll make in the future, teak or otherwise. And as we go about carrying on, just remember some things that some of these other people have said: kindness, compassion, curiosity, duty to others, socializing. And my personal favorite is going on adventures together. For Doc, adventures were maybe the cliffs of Colorado, the edges of Europe, off to India, Australia, South America, motorcycle rides to Alaska, San Francisco, New Orleans, and back, sometimes on his own, Staker, right? Trips to Coe, the Key City, Chicago to go see a concert, a simple tractor ride to a farm, a boat ride to Bobbers, maybe even just a short drive to see a friend and go out to dinner. Whatever our adventures may be, borrowing from the words of Bob Dylan, one of Herron's favorites, here's a note to Doc and some words for all of us as we go along. May you always be courageous, stand upright, and be strong. May your heart always be joyful. May your song always be sung. May you build a ladder to the stars and climb on every rung. May God bless you and keep you always. May you stay forever young.
Dr. James Pfeiffer joined the Coe community in 1985, first as Vice President for Academic Affairs, and then as Coe's 14th President. Jim served Coe with the highest distinction until his retirement in 2013. I've come to learn that one of the hidden benefits of this role was the wisdom and counsel that Doc could offer when directing the college through both triumph and challenge. Dr. Pfeiffer will expand on his deep relationship that he had with Kent.
My first encounter with Dr. Kent Herron was just before the start of school in the fall of 1985. I had just arrived at Coe as the new dean of the faculty, and the president of the college hosted an informal reception for the faculty on the patio and lawn of his home in Cedar Rapids. And knowing Coe to be a traditional, highly regarded liberal arts college, I went expecting to meet faculty in jackets with leather patches on the elbows, button-down shirts with frayed collars, and no doubt there would be glasses of sherry handed around. And the gathering was pretty much as I expected. Academic style was on full display. Then Kent arrived on his motorcycle. bespeckled with paint. And he was immediately at pains to explain to the president that he was late because he had been hanging a large load of laundry on his outdoor clothesline to avoid the forbidding expense of running his electric dryer. What I did not appreciate at that moment was that I was being given a first glimpse of an all-important thread woven into the fabric of Coe College, namely the life and career of Kent Herron. I was offered a glimpse of the role he had already come to play at Coe and would continue to play in decades to come. What was that role? Why was it so important? Kent was a complex individual with layers of subtleties in his personality. At one level, and most importantly, he had a first-rate mind, something easy to overlook given the gregariousness and unceasing social activities. After all, he completed a doctorate in mathematics in the complex field of modern algebra at an early age, and he was a superior classroom teacher. He also wrote clear, hard, pure English prose, sure proof of a keen mind. But perhaps the key to understanding Kent's role lies at a deeper level. He was a natural teacher, not just in front of class, but as a mentor. Kent never stopped teaching, whether by conscious instruction or as a living example of the right values. Kent mentored the young people he so cherished in every arena of his life. And those arenas were many. Indeed, Kent possessed a seemingly inexhaustible energy for living life to the fullest, in and among the students and faculty around him. This is where the motorcycle comes in. Kent and that cycle, often with a student on a second cycle in tow, went all over North America. In his car, with one or several students as companions, Kent toured the back roads of the continental USA and made his several annual pilgrimages to Aspen for skiing. Somehow he found time to make a trip to Europe each year, always with students along, and always with those students receiving an education far beyond the classroom. In all of that travel, and this has been noted, it must be admitted, one of Kent's clear personality traits was revealed. Kent dearly loved a good bargain, especially in food and lodging. He kept a string of motels between Cedar Rapids and Aspen in business for years. Motels that had one thing in common. They charged $4 or $5 a night for a room. He would drive an extra 30 miles in a snowstorm at the end of an exhausting day to find lodging for $4 rather than pay the exorbitant rate of $8 at a closer place. And Lenny and I, among so many others, have gone with him on so many Friday nights in search of a good catfish fry. We would drive halfway to Des Moines to get a meal that was 25% fish and 75% breading and grease. But the price was right. And a second catfish was on the house for survivors. Kent not only traveled to Aspen several times each winter, he conducted a January term course there for many people in this room. Many people will remember that with intense fondness. That course was a clinic, not just in how to get down the mountain, but in life. A great many students on that trip had their lives changed for the better. Sometimes their entire careers retrieved through the careful attention and mentoring of Dr. Herron. That trip was a masterclass in how a good liberal arts college should care for its students. As extensive as were Kent's peripatetic adventures with students, they did not begin to exhaust the arenas in which he interacted, both with students and with the entire Coe community. Each summer, he ran a house painting crew of young men, often drawn from the famous, some would say infamous, Teak fraternity, which he also found time to serve as an advisor. The gang would paint all day, often in extreme heat, and then Kent would treat them to several hours of water skiing at his house in Coralville. Now, they loved skiing, but as many confessed privately, they would have dearly loved to eat dinner before passing out from hunger. You see, another of Kent's eccentricities was his ironclad habit of cooking and serving the evening meal at 10 p.m. As a newly arrived administrator at Coe, I had my first meal at Kent so late one evening, I thought he was trying to kill me. But despite the heat of the day and the lateness of dinner, generations of friendships were forged in that arena, and the mentoring never ceased. The evening meals for student painters were, of course, but a small fraction of the gatherings, large and small, at Kent's home. Over the many years, the nights of food and libations with this group or that, this individual or that, those nights were numberless. And in those hours, broadly speaking, two things happened. Two things were always in play, neither by design and neither entirely conscious. First and most visibly, those evenings put on display Kent's inexhaustible love of life, life with all of its warts and imperfections, life that was filled with ironic humor, if only one looked for it. And Kent looked for and found and relished the delicious ironies in life, ironies in which he took such delight. He loved Inspector Clouseau in The Pink Panther, stories by James Thurber, skits from Beyond the Fringe and Monty Python. In fact, he loved all things British, especially Her Majesty the Queen. At the drop of a hat, he would retell in detail this or that story from Thurber, or recount a scene from The Pink Panther. Now, of course, we had all heard the stories countless times, and it would have been boring to revisit them yet again, save for the way Kent would get involved and begin to giggle at his own performance. His laughter was infectious, and it would finally draw every listener in, each of us relishing a story that was funnier in Kent's retelling than the original. On those evenings, Kent could suddenly become a performer with a wonderfully droll sense of humor. He would adopt a tone of mock seriousness and announce, as if it were obviously true, some piece of utter nonsense, or in the same tone take a gentle poke at the pretentiousness of a friend or colleague. And here we come to the second thing always in play at those gatherings of students and colleagues. Kent was always mentoring. He did so very seldom by direct instruction or by admonition, but rather by example, by displaying and honoring the foundational values that he believed to be critical to life. Central to these was a bone-deep commitment to embracing respect for and concern for others, because it was these values he intuitively understood that underlay the all-important gift of a sense of decency, old-fashioned, unalloyed, simple decency, a quality that it sometimes seems has gone out of American culture. His sense of decency, I believe, is what made him so deeply compassionate. He always took the side of the one being attacked or criticized, whether a student, a colleague, or a young dean. Compassion and decency. He was always mentoring. As noted, he had a deep appreciation for the role of irony in life, not simply because it can be amusing, but because it is so quintessentially human. He loved the very foibles of our existence, the things that unite all of us in the human family. He could look unflinchingly at the shortcomings of others, but with compassion, not judgment, and without bitterness. Ken accepted each of us for who we are, which explains the incredibly long list of close lifetime friends bonded to him, even on this hour. Kent did not live a typical academic life, but he lived a life as authentic as any I have known or hope to know, one devoid of pretense or pomposity, one committed to learning and knowledge, but as part of a full existence. And he was always mentoring. By living example, he taught generations of students and colleagues to be generous, forgiving, and grateful human beings. In Shakespeare's phrase, he was a man. Take him for all in all. I shall not see his like again.
I want to thank each of you for sharing your memories with us here today. I also want to thank the talented and ever-dedicated staff of Coe for all the arrangements that they've offered for us to connect and remember Kent. I appreciate all your time and service to our students in this community. And I also thank each and every one of you for being with us of this hour, of this day, to remember Kent. After the ceremony, I invite you to all immediately proceed to Stewart Memorial Library for a reception and a sharing of more stories about Kent. Please know that we have items and mementos from Kent's life spread throughout the library, so please move around. Thanks to Matt Walters, we even have one of Kent's motorcycles in the library. It's the skip permission, beg forgiveness approach, which Doc modeled well throughout his entire life. I ask that you join us. And yes, there will be red solo cups, which will be used to raise a toast to the good doctor. Further, at 6 o'clock this evening, all are invited to the Olympic in the Nubo area of Cedar Rapids for more conviviality and storytelling. I look forward to seeing many of you there. Among the many contributions and gifts that Doc shared with this community and institution, I have the privilege and joy of announcing a further endearing gift. Doc directed a substantial portion of his estate to the college, an amount that will approach nearly $4 million. The funds will establish an endowed chair, academic chair, in honor of his parents, and provide scholarships to men who display the attributes of the men of Tau Kappa Epsilon Zeta chapter. This generosity affirms his love of Coe, his value and belief in the life transformative power of a liberal education, and his love for teak. Please join me in a round of gratitude and appreciation as we thank Doc for this incredible gift and amazing legacy. As we conclude, let me share one reflection and the image of Kent that I held on to when I learned of his passing, seeking peace and God's grace. During an alumni celebration a couple of years ago, I had the joy of skiing with Doc, the Abernathys, and my family. How blessed am I that my kids got to ski with Doc. On that particular day, we had an alumni event that was mid-mountain, which meant that we had to ski to our lunches. Those of you who know Doc on the mountain can confirm that there was no way we would take the logical and easy way of skiing down to a lift and then riding to mid-mountain to join all those that were gathered there. So we needed to cut across the mountain, tackling some moguls and steeps along the way. That day was like so many with Kent, except on this day, something happened to me that I had never before seen. And in that moment, I realized that I needed to value and treasure each of my days with Kent, understanding that we all travel against time. On that day, and only on that day of skiing with Kent, Doc fell. And more surprising, he had a hard time returning to his feet. My offer to help him really ticked him off. And then it disappointed him when he needed to accept my offer to give him a boost. We, of course, had a wonderful lunch with alumni from around the country and friends from Aspen. But afterward, Kent told me he was tired, didn't think he could ski anymore that day, and asked me and Terry to assure that we could get some of the newer skiers in the group throughout the afternoon so that they can enjoy a good day on the mountain. He told me he wanted to rest before dinner that evening, a dinner that was being held in his honor. I then made the mistake, with temerity, of suggesting that I ski down the hill with him, to which I was assured firmly that he needed not the help. What the two of us didn't know, and couldn't have known at that time, is that would be Kent's last run. For some balance and leg issues prevented him from skiing the last couple of years. What Kent didn't know is that from a distance, because the whole thing was a bit unnerving and so out of character for Doc, Heather and I did follow him down the mountain, just to be sure. And today, that is how I'm remembering Kent. That day, that moment. For I saw Kent ski alone, for the simple pleasure of it. Released from having to tend to a flock of friends, no longer burdened by teaching of others, not leading a crew down the mountain or on a paint site, without the need to mentor and to shepherd. Even in his 80s, Kent was an eloquent skier, and I watched as he laid down technically proficient and gracefully arched turns, free from worries and just skiing for himself. He, of course, did just fine, and I knew he'd get to his car. So as I turned off to catch another trail to join the others, I caught one last glimpse of Dr. W. Kent Herron, silhouetted with the framing of a bluebird clear Colorado sky as he crested the hilltop and dropped to the other side. God bless Kent Herron. Thank you all for being here. We stand adjourned.